Two college expenses essentially all college students have, but they are not eligible expenses for withdrawal out of a 529 plan. What are they and how's that all work? I've got that and more coming up. My name is Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. All right, so how the 529 plan works is it's the Roth IRA, but for college expenses, and they've expanded that to other educational expenses as well. But the idea is it's similar to the Roth IRA in the tax benefits that you get. And therefore, no big surprise, a little surprise, no big surprise that through the Secure Act 2.0 in the future, you're going to be able to transfer some of your excess $529 into a Roth IRA. We're waiting on the IRS to come up with some clarification on the rules there, and then we'll be talking all about that and doing that planning work. But the 529 plan, every state has their own 529 plan, has a record keeper sponsor, all that sort of stuff. You can use any state's 529 plan, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what school, what college your child or grandchild ends up going to, you can use any one. Many states, not all, many states offer state tax benefits if you use their state's plan and pay their state's taxes. For example, Indiana, I'll explain it in just a second, that's where I live, has the very best state tax incentive of any state out there. However, you only get that tax benefit if you pay Indiana taxes. If you live in California and you want to use Indiana's plan because you've heard it's got some awesome state tax benefits, but you don't pay Indiana taxes, then it's of no benefit to you. So typically you're going to want to use your own state's plan if it offers state benefits, but you've got to be aware of that, work with your CFP on it. But at a federal level, at a high level, your contributions to the 529 plan, those are not federally tax deductible. So it's sort of like after-tax money, just like the Roth, think of it like that. Many states, this is where they will apply some sort of tax benefit, a tax deduction, or in Indiana's case, a tax credit on your contribution. But at a federal level, the contribution's not a tax benefit. All of your investment activity is all tax sheltered. So the growth and dividends and all of those earnings, those are all tax sheltered, tax deferred. And then when you withdraw the dollars, if the withdrawal is for a qualified educational expense, then the growth comes out tax-free. Fantastic. If you receive some sort of state benefit, then your contribution that you never got a deduction for federally, but maybe got a benefit for on the state, if you withdraw your contribution for a qualifying or eligible education expense, then that also comes out without any tax consequence as well. If you withdraw the dollars not for a qualified educational expense, okay? And that's not the purpose of this video. You may be wondering, what happens if my student gets a scholarship? What happens? Let's just say for the sake of this of this video, if your child doesn't go to college and you say, now I'm just going to withdraw the money, well, then the growth you will have to pay tax on, and you'll also have to pay a little bit of penalty on it as well. Now you've got all the, it's been tax sheltered all along. So, but because it received that tax sheltered benefit because it was intended to use for college, if you're not using it for college, you got to pay the tax on the growth and a little bit of penalty. So quick side comment, lots of states offer deductions. In Indiana, there's the state tax credit. And this is a fantastic thing because ever since I believe it was 2007, on your contribution to the Indiana plan, you get a 20% state tax credit up to $1,000. So you contribute $5,000, but this is per tax return. So not per person, not per child, whatever. It's per tax return. You contribute $5,000, you get a $1,000 state tax credit. Now you need to have at least $1,000 of Indiana state taxes to get the full benefit, but it's pretty significant. They're increasing it this year for 2023 to still a 20% state tax credit, but on the first $7,500. So that moves the tax credit from $1,000 to $1,500. That's a big benefit. Most states offer deductions. Michigan, which we're just south of the border there, in Michigan, you get a tax deduction on the first $10,000 that you contribute. Note that any withdrawals that you make are netted against those contributions, and you receive a deduction on the netted amount of your contribution. But check out your state's plan. You're definitely going to want to be aware of both these federal laws, but also your state's laws. Okay, so in that explanation, I talked about it's got to be an eligible expense in order to be withdrawn tax-free. And so what are those? And number one, it's got to be from an eligible institution. You can't use this money and for any educational reason and say, well, it was an eligible expense. No, it's got to be with an eligible institution. And what is that? Basically, an eligible institution is one that has a federal ID, one that participates in the FAFSA program. Most do. You could say almost all, but there are some surprises where they don't. If your child or grandchild is going to beauty school or culinary institute, you're going to want to check to see if that institution participates in the FAFSA program. If so, then it's eligible expense. If it doesn't, then withdrawals or using the 529 plan for those expenses would not be eligible. So number one, an eligible expense needs to be with an eligible institution, one that is participating in the FAFSA system. But then the other are your common required expenses. So tuition, of course, room and board, yes. Books and those sorts of fees, yes to that as well. Even a computer, yeah, those sorts of necessary expenses, those are all eligible. You got to make sure that if you're living in, so your child's living in some sort of luxury on-campus housing and or off-campus or something like that, and all of a sudden the tuition plus all of that extravagant rent exceeds the real cost of attendance that each institution posts each year, well, then your total eligible expenses are capped at what that university says the expected cost of attendance is. So you've got to be aware of that. But for the most part, tuition, room and board, books, those sort of required fees, those are all eligible expenses. So then here we go. The purpose of the video, 2 expenses that essentially all college students have. All college students have these 2 expenses, and yet they are not eligible expenses. What are they? The first one is transportation costs. I remember early in my career, I had a client, and I wasn't really familiar with all these rules, not the way that I am now, but had a client say, hey, my child is choosing, this was in northern Indiana, child is choosing to go to school at Arizona State. And therefore, we've got to get her there. She can't go to, this is 20 years ago. So the internet was created, but you couldn't attend school online. And so it's a required, to attend Arizona State, she has to get there. So therefore, this is a required expense to have her get a plane ticket and get there. And I said, nah, it doesn't pass smell test. And I checked, and yeah, it's not eligible. So your transportation from wherever you are to the school, that's not an eligible expense, deductible, withdrawal from your 529 plan. That's not an eligible expense. What about the bus pass that many people need? I went to Michigan State University. You needed a bus pass, essentially. And so, no, that's not an eligible expense either. Or parking fee. If you're going to park, if your student grandchild is going to have a vehicle on campus, some of them charge a parking fee to use the lots. That's not an eligible expenses. And certainly a familiar transportation-related cost at Michigan State University, probably a lot of other big schools, those parking tickets. Yeah, those are not eligible either. I'm assuming I still have a few unpaid over in East Lansing. So transportation costs as a whole, essentially, yes, it's required in that you've got to transport your kid to college and they've got to get around college, but that's not an eligible qualifying educational expense. So that's one. And then the other is their health care, their health insurance, their health costs. Now you might say, well, that's an obvious one, right? This is my child. I'm, keeping them on my health insurance, and they're allowed to be on my health insurance until age 26. So I'm still working and I'm keeping the family's health insurance, so no big deal. I understand that. And so, yeah, just obviously that's not a deductible expense if you try to reimburse yourself or withdraw dollars from the 529 plan to cover your portion of covering them on your health insurance. More so what I'm talking about is it's becoming more and more common for universities and colleges to add a health service fee or a health clinic fee right onto your tuition statement. So it almost looks like this is part of tuition and certainly feels like, well, this is a required cost of attendance here, which that's oftentimes the barometer of, is this an eligible expense to be covered from my 529 plan? Well, if it's required to attend, then it sort of is. That's not a great barometer. A lot of people use it. I use it as a sort of rule of thumb, but it's not perfect, and it doesn't apply in every situation. So health, that $200 a semester or something like that, a service fee for having the health clinic available to your child, whether they use it or not, that's not actually a reimbursable expense from the 529 plan. So simply paying your full tuition bill from your 529 plan or reimbursing yourself for it, if this expense is on there, technically you've got to offset that. Now, if your child, maybe if the university you go to, they don't charge that, but your student goes to the clinic and they apply it to their student ID, and the fee shows up on the next tuition statement, that's not reimbursable. That's not an eligible expense from the 529 plan. All right, so that's a brush up of what the eligible expenses are, and two very, very common not eligible education expenses or qualifying expenses from a 529 plan. The point is that you're a little bit more familiar for the do's and don'ts with the 529 plan, because it is a fabulous tax saving strategy. Make sure that you're working with your CFP to determine, should you be using a 529 plan? When should you start? How much should you fund? What are all the rules and nuances, especially with your state's potential tax incentive as well? So work with your certified financial planner on that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or send us an email, info@Korhorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.